I was the best in what I did.
But what I did wasn't very nice. Oops, wrong character. It's been 2 years since the announcement of the Disney Plus Moon Knight series, and in that time, my feelings toward it have cooled from a cautious curiosity to a tepid indifference. It took a while and a lot of shitty movies, but I've become disillusioned with mainstream entertainment. There's virtually nothing of value to be found there. So, why would I bother to take notice of a C-tier Marvel character most people never even heard of? Because I've been collecting Moon Knight comics since the launch of the Charlie Houston David Finch run back in 2006. That's why. I picked up the #1 issue on a whim. I'd just rediscovered comic book collecting at the time, and comic book collectors know how tempting those new #1s can be. I quickly fell in love with the character and the honesty and brutality of the book. So much so that I began collecting Moon Knight back issues. Over the intervening 15 years, I've managed to track down all of the issues of his solo series and many of his early appearances in other comics. But reading through his first solo series, penned by Doug Minch and illustrated most notably by Bill Sienkiewicz, for the first time was one of my favorite comic book reading experiences. Moon Knight was a street-level hero taking down scum largely in the underbelly of New York City. It was great stuff and looked great, too. But Moon Knight went completely unnoticed by the mainstream, even after the MCU exploded onto the scene, and he was largely unnoticed even by most comic book readers, though he does have a small but loyal following. Fast forward to 2 years ago, we got the announcement of the Moon Knight series on Disney Plus, and I only know it was 2 years ago because the announcement motivated me to create a reaction video that I'm going to link in the description below. Even at that time, I was pretty much done with the MCU and every other major studio franchise. But that cautious curiosity I mentioned earlier was enough to convince myself to give the show a chance when it came out. And then we didn't get any information about it. The lost year 2020 came and went, and besides the announcement of Oscar Isaac's casting, there was hardly a peep. Over the past couple of months, trailers began dropping, and we finally got a glimpse of what the show would have to offer. I'm not very happy with the casting choice. Moon Knight should be played by a rugged, square-jawed, manly man, and Oscar Isaac ain't that, but he's not a bad actor, all things considered. It's, of course, too early to form an opinion on the actual show, but the trailers haven't done anything to encourage my enthusiasm, or to make me think it's going to be a Moon Knight that I want to see. Moon Knight, or Mark Spector, grew up in a working-class family in New York City. His father was a rabbi, but Spector became a mercenary and acquired wealth by exploiting foreign wars. When Spector betrayed Bushman, an evil, sadistic motherfucker who became a recurring villain throughout Moon Knight's series, he was left for dead in the desert of the Sudan. Brought in from the harsh desert, his lifeless body was laid before a statue of Khonshu, the Egyptian god of the moon, and he miraculously returned to life. In the earlier series, it was kind of left up in the air whether or not Khonshu saved Spector's life and imbued him with powers as a sole disciple, and this led to questions about Spector's sanity, which was played out as he struggled to balance his many alter egos, Stephen Grant, Moon Knight, and Jake Lockley, and also in his struggle to please a god that may or may not even exist. Moon Knight is often labeled as Marvel's version of Batman, and on a purely surface level, I can almost understand that. Almost. He's a rich guy who lives in New York City and fights crime. But the similarities in there. Batman isn't a paranoid schizophrenic with dissociative identity disorder that strives to appease an Egyptian god. From what I can tell of the trailers, it looks like they're going to try to incorporate at least some of Moon Knight's lore from the comics, some of his pathos. Khonshu seems to be the narrator, and they show Mark Spector suited up in military gear. I can only assume he's on some kind of mission in Africa, but I doubt they'll make him a mercenary. The basics seem to be in place, but it's the execution I'm worried about, and I'll just have to wait and see on that, if I decide to see it all. The trailers make the show appear to be on par with the lesser of the Marvel Netflix series. If we're talking Luke Cage, then I'll be okay with that, but if we're talking Iron Fist, there won't be much worth checking out. The show looks like it'll be dark and brooding and violent, as a Moon Knight show should be. Moon Knight looks formidable in his costume, but also about 50 pounds bigger than Oscar Isaac looks outside of it. And they do that weird gravelly voice thing Christian Bale adopted for his portrayal of Batman. That could get annoying pretty quickly. Now, when I first saw the show's take on the costume, my eyes nearly rolled right out of their sockets, but that was because I thought he was wearing mummy wraps, and that would be a bit on the nose, and frankly stupid. Looking at him in action, that may not be the case, but there are far too many awesome iterations of the costume in the comics for me to be impressed with the one they've gone with. But it looks like he goes through a couple costume changes throughout the series, so we'll see. One other bit that kind of made me question the intelligence of the series writers was a clip of a statue of Khonshu being discovered on the surface of the moon. Khonshu is indeed the Egyptian god of the moon. His role was to ensure the moon's safe passage through the night sky, plus a few other responsibilities like women's fertility. However, he didn't live on the moon. The only time I can recall Spectre going to the moon in the comics was during the original Sin event, but he was just part of a team that went to investigate the disappearance of Watu, the Watcher. Moon Knight really has no business going to outer space, but the word moon is in his name, so... There have been two Moon Knight series that came out over the past couple of years, one still ongoing, that I feel they'll draw most of the lore for the show from. I'll freely admit to having never read them because I mostly stopped buying Marvel Comics after Secret Empire came out in 2017, but I do plan to grab the back issues eventually. If the TV series ignores the solid history of this character in place of the usually substandard content Marvel has been shitting out over the past 5 or so years, the show might be worse than even I could predict. That's really my only issue with this whole thing. I've waited to see Moon Knight on the screen for nearly 2 decades now, and it finally happens after Marvel has made it clear time and time again that they don't want me as a fan. At least I've largely been able to avoid the disappointment most fans of long-running series have suffered time and time again of late. If I watch Moon Knight and it does suck, I'll survive. I've stopped expecting quality entertainment from people whose job it is to provide it, which is kind of depressing when you sit and think about it, but you can only be fooled so many times before you become the fool. Besides, it's not like many franchises I hold near and dear to my heart are being dragged to the altar and sacrificed to modern woke culture or anything.
This is ridiculous.